Hello everybody, thank you for joining my session today. My name is Andrew Morris from Turnkey Consulting. We are a risk management organization who helps organizations manage their business risks, everything from processes and technical implementations, governance risk and compliance, identity and access management, cybersecurity and application security throughout your enterprise. I am a managing consultant within the cyber and application security domains, and I've been working in this industry for around 14 years. In today's session, I'm going to take you through some of the risks that organizations face when working with the Internet of Things. So the first thing to take a look at is, what are the business risks? So we all know that IoT is a business enabler. It's enabled our businesses to expand at a rapid pace, see more information than ever before, and connect with our customers in real time, right in the palm of their hands in many cases. And it's allowed us to innovate very, very quickly. But unfortunately for us, criminals are innovating even quicker, and they're now exploiting the Internet of Things for their own gains. In this space, not all vendors are created equal. We'd like to think that everything is nice and secure around us and we're implementing everything risk-free. But sadly, in the race to be the first to market, some vendors are cutting corners. They're pushing out devices without basic controls in place, and as a result, that can actually introduce business risk to our organization. Most organizations will typically have the opinion of just let IT deal with it, but it's a problem for all of us to deal with and to take into account. It's not just something we can pass to IT, because ultimately this isn't just a risk of IT being hacked. We are making decisions that will impact the next decade. I've personally spent the 14 years of my career fixing mistakes or due to decisions made in good faith 14 years ago. And we're at a tipping point now where we don't want to spend the next 10 years of our lives fixing mistakes made now because we've rushed into things to implement solutions. Into business risks we are talking about will differ for every single organization. Not every industry will have the same risks as one another, but there are a few recurring trends that we do witness. One thing for certain, though, is actually we don't typically introduce new risks to our organization. In fact, the chance of our existing business risks materializing will increase. IoT is not a new concept, and organizations have already been seeing complications arising from connecting IoT devices to their networks and to their business processes. So let's take a look at some of the typical business risks that organizations face and some of the ways these business risks have been realized through misuse of Internet of Things. These are all real examples, which I'm going to be taking you through. Now, fraud is a common one, and it's no surprise that fraud is here. Humans have been committing fraud since the concept of deals existed, and we've been communicating to each other. User-based insurance scams have the potential to disrupt emerging technologies that place sensors on individuals or objects. So, for example, black boxes in cars to see if you're a safe driver, or smartwatches or fitness trackers to see that measure you to see if you can lower your health insurance premiums. If our devices are in the hands of people, we have to have methods in place to ensure that that the data being sent to us is trustworthy and no one's trying to manipulate and game our system, as that flipping phone demonstrates. Some other risks are the business disruption and supply chain risks. One of my favorite examples of recent years was in a small town in America. No one's car fobs were working. They were unable to start their cars or unlock their cars remotely. It wasn't until there was a local power cut and everyone's car fob stopped working that they realized that a local engineer in his basement was broadcasting radio signals that just by pure chance happened to be on the same frequency as everyone's car fobs. And once the power cut took out his radio transmitter, everyone's car keys suddenly worked again. The other one is toasters being hijacked to attack. Managing to disrupt entire networks and supply chains, and of course being rendered obsolete from making toast. We have to consider that if our Internet of Things or our devices are critical to performing business processes or enable use of other functionality, such as unlocking cars, they can be disrupted. Is there a workaround that organizations can use to mitigate these risks? Fortunately, impact to human life is not something many organizations will have to deal with, but many within the health industry, vehicles, and other critical infrastructures, and even manufacturing can have this impact on their risk register. So, for example, with in the healthcare industry, pacemakers can be hacked and compromised, or other medical devices inserted into human beings. And in many of these cases, it's not a simple case of let's upgrade the hardware or produce an update for the software. Once these things are inside human beings, they can be very difficult to upgrade or fix any issues. And if they are compromised, then human life can be lost as a result of their pacemaker playing up. Sensors being fed incorrect data is another famous one from Stuxnet with the critical infrastructure, where a nuclear power plant where a nuclear power plant was spinning up, and the sensor was showing that everything was fine. Meanwhile, the centrifuge was spinning up to a critical, dangerous speed, where there was nearly a nuclear meltdown. Other industries include smart cars, all brand new plane software, all interconnected. And if we're not careful, we could introduce software that could ultimately harm individuals' lives. And in this cases, we need to make sure that when our devices fail, they fail securely, or do they, make a decision whether they fail secure or fail safe, just to ensure that no one is hurt as a consequence. Reputational damage, another one of my favorites here with sarcastic scooters. The smart scooters you can pick up on many street corners these days, where you just tap your phone to them and you pay per mile or pay per minute. Somebody managed to hijack a chain of them in Australia, where instead of the beeps and confirmation sounds you got when you hired one, it made sarcastic comments about the rider's weight and various other things which aren't fit for repeating in public. While it was hilarious, there was a massive impact to the organized reputation as a result of that, and they had to remove every single bike and rebuild all of the hardware and software built into them. And Canon security cameras, while it's probably unfair to pick on Canon because they're certainly not the last to do this, they were one of the first to produce smart cameras which were easily hackable over the internet. And by hackable, I mean they had a default username and password which anyone could use. They identified the flaw, pulled them from the market, reissued them with a very similar flaw, and as a result they suffered a massive reputational damage and left the market for quite some time. If your devices interact with customers, we have to be very conscious of how they're used, how they could be misused, and how they could be perceived, just so our reputational damage is not impacted, which can negatively affect our share price or faith consumers have in our products. Two types of data breaches here, one of corporate data and the other one of data privacy. With a data breach for corporate information, one of the more famous ones was a fish tank used to breach a business. An organization bought a large fish tank, connected it to the corporate network, but unfortunately that fish tank had a flaw in its software, which allowed criminals to access the wider corporate network and steal the data that they required. With smart fridges providing login details, this was a case of a smart fridge was not properly protecting credentials stored on it. So the smart fridge had access to the network. The smart fridge wasn't secure. Criminals could use the smart fridge to access the wider network. We always have to be careful to double check what our devices are connected to. If we have a highly secure network, especially for example in manufacturing or critical infrastructure, we need to very carefully vet any device that is connected to that network so we don't inadvertently create a bridge for a criminal to gain access. And in the privacy space, there's been a number of cases of baby monitors being hijacked where people could actually talk to children in the rooms rather than just monitor them. And remote camera feeds, there's websites dedicated to live camera feeds across the world of security cameras that are not properly secured. We always have to be conscious of how our devices are used, where they're stored, what they can see, what they capture, and just to make sure that they can't be misused by somebody else. Only the intended party can view them. They can also lead to physical theft. A car sharing application helped thieves in North America. There was an Uber for there was a application which allowed customers to hire smart cars for the day rather than the normal cars you would normally expect to hire. And a criminal used that application to find the location of all these smart cars, disable the tracking software in them, and drove off with half of a fleet of high-end sports cars. And there was another one with third-party car alarms, which actually did the opposite of what was intended. It was a third-party car alarm kit connected to the car, And when the car alarm was active, as in the siren was going off, it actually allowed hackers to compromise the car, to steal it and break into it. So you've got to make sure that any of your devices can't be checked for possible misuse. You might have in your mind how your device will be used and utilized, but is there any other way that somebody could misuse or abuse it? Now, of course, depending on how your organization is set up, its aims and activities, some of these um, risks might blend into another. A privacy breach could blend into a loss of reputation and declining share price. But if you think of an example of risk, it is likely to increase when connecting IoT infrastructure. The time to act is now. IoT devices are being rapidly connected to our network and infrastructure and handed out to individuals, but already we are seeing a lot of data breaches and security breaches resulting from Internet of Things being connected to our devices. But it's not all doom and gloom. As an industry, we can take steps to mitigate these risks. So what are the business considerations when deploying IT? The first thing is, what data do you actually need? More devices means more data, and most organizations now already have a massive problem with data hoarding. So if you can imagine, if you triple, quadruple, or introduce a data feed for every single device in the consumer's hands, you're suddenly exponentially increasing the amount of data available to you. What do you do with all that? Identify what information you need, filter out the rest, and only capture what's important. What can access your data? So for example, can you trust your data integrity 100%? Historically, you might only have a single data feed from a handful of users updating an application, but now you have apps and devices themselves updating data directly in your infrastructure. How do you ensure that that data is still integral? Just making sure you have validation points in place to check that data before you input it into the system or make business decisions based on that information. Do you really need to capture personal information? If you work in the user-based insurance field, you'll be capturing a lot of information about users, about individuals, where they are, who they are, their heart rate, who they talk to, and everything else in between. We have to really be careful when dealing with personal information, so we're not storing anything that we shouldn't be, and when we can't infer from the data information we're not authorized to capture, or we do not have permission to capture. Many organizations have already fallen afoul of installing devices on their corporate cars and vehicles to track the location of those devices, because they inadvertently fall foul of monitoring employees at work. Where will your devices physically reside? Are they going to be given to individuals to live in their homes, in their cars, in their office? If someone has access to it directly, can they manipulate and tamper with it? Can you put the appropriate safeguards in place to make sure that these devices are secure no matter where they are? And have you identified all the overheads? Connecting the Internet of Things to your existing infrastructure and processes means more overheads, more resources, more support. Trying to roll out the Internet of Things without determining the impact to your business will quickly result in unexpected work. So some final tips to leave you with before the end of this session. Always consider security by design. Identify your key assets and protect them. Connecting to existing systems should be done carefully, making sure the appropriate checks and balances are in place. Validate your data. Delete what you don't need. Make sure you implement correct governance and ownership within the organization. Who is responsible for the devices, the operation, the data they collect? When an incident is detected, who is going to respond and manage that? Make sure you do your third-party vetting. Make sure the suppliers of devices and the third parties who use them are making good use of best practice security, making sure the designs are built, the machines are built to a good standard. Make sure that they use open standards when talking to them. The last thing you want is to be locked into a specific vendor for a decade because they were the first one you found. So make sure you take your time in vetting that and there's no supply chain risk to your organization. Redesign your business processes when implementing the Internet of Things. Don't just bolt IoT onto the end of it. Now is a good time to take a look at that business process, the flow of data, how people access it, and make sure that everything is built into that process, especially if you're dealing with input provided by end users. Change default passwords goes without saying for any piece of hardware, By default, most devices will be shipped with a certain username and password. Make sure that is changed. The vast majority of passwords for the Internet of Things can be found on the internet, so make sure you change it so nobody can easily guess it, break it, and then compromise that device for whatever reason. And keep an eye on law. Certainly here in the UK, the UK government is proposing various changes and standards which organisations must adhere to. But internationally, there's quite a few, including ones from the NIST organisation in the United States. Do your suppliers follow any particular code of conduct or code of design? I look forward to the day when we can look for a sticker on the box that indicates it complies with certain legislation and ensure that it's secure out of the box. That's all for today's session. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at the email address below. And please take a look on the turnkeyconsulting.com website for more information. Thank you very much for your time.